Number 10, Dr. Hate. Let's start off with the girl who literally has hate in her name. This girl's basically what happens when you take the classic cool Dr. Fate and run him through a gritty reboot filter until he looks like a heavy metal album cover from a garage sale. She works with Amanda Waller, who is already the most annoying boss in the DC universe, helping her hunt down heroes because apparently she doesn't have enough hobbies. The biggest problem here is that she felt like a placeholder villain designed by a committee that was running late for lunch. DC spent months acting like her secret identity was going to change our lives, but when the mask finally came off, the reaction was a massive yawn. Turns out she was just a dark piece of Raven's soul that got separated from her, which, if you're a lifelong DC fan, you know that this is a plot point the Teen Titans have used more times than a fast food joint uses deep fryer oil. From here on, everyone's like,
"Oh shit, here we go again."
On top of that, her name is literally Dr. Hate, which I think sounds like a villain a 5-year-old would come up with while grumpy about nap time. But it doesn't stop there. She uses something called a nightmare stone to make people scared, which is a total ripoff of Scarecrow's whole vibe, but with less personality. What makes it even worse is that she was pushed as this huge deal in a massive story, yet she had the depth of a puddle in a drought. Fans were already tired of Amanda Waller's endless heroes are bad rants, and adding a generic henchman with a shiny helmet definitely didn't help. She didn't bring anything new to the table besides a recycled backstory and a costume that looks like a Spirit Halloween version of a much better character. Essentially, she's the poster child of every event fatigue and lazy writing. In the end, nothing says creative peak like naming your brand new scary villain after a basic human emotion and the medical degree she eventually never earned. As terrible as she was, though, the next ones are even worse because we're just getting started. Number 9, Punchline. If you ever wondered what would happen if a toxic internet comment section became a person, look no further than Punchline. Alexis Kane is the Joker's new partner, but she's the polar opposite of the fun, chaotic Harley Quinn we used to know. DC decided to market her so hard that she was appearing on variant covers before she even had a single line of dialogue. It felt like the company was trying to force a new legendary character down our throats, which usually doesn't make us readers want to spit it back out. She isn't a victim of the Joker. She's a fangirl who thinks his mass murdering is actually a very deep philosophical statement, but that's not the main reason we dislike her. First off, her personality is basically an edgy college student who thinks she's smarter than everyone else, which is the most punchable trait a villain can have. Second, she spends half her time giving long, boring speeches about why society's a joke, while the other half is spent miraculously beating up heroes who have 20 years more training than she does. What makes it even worse is how the writers often make characters like Harley Quinn or Catwoman look like amateurs just so Punchline can win a fight. On top of that, she lacks the tragic heart that made people actually care about Harley's journey. She's just a mean girl with a knife and a very expensive makeup budget who thinks being a serial killer is a cool personality trait. To make matters worse, her rise to fame felt like a corporate boardroom decision to sell more #1 issues to collectors. But what angers me the most is the way she talks down to the heroes in this incredibly condescending tone that makes you wish Batman would just let her finish her monologue in a jail cell. She's basically the pick-me girl of the supervillain world, and we fans definitely aren't picking her. Comment down below if you pick her so we know who needs to go to the doctor. Number 8, White Rabbit. Some characters were created to tell a deep story. Others are clearly just there because a writer was horny. Gianna Hudson was a socialite who can split her body into two people, one of whom is the White Rabbit, a villain who wears almost nothing. Her outfit is basically just white lingerie and bunny ears, which makes her look like she got lost on her way to Comic-Con. She showed up in a Batman comic that was supposed to be dark and serious, but every time she appeared, the tone shifted into a low-budget swimsuit calendar. The most annoying thing about her is that she doesn't actually do anything besides run away. For several issues, Batman just chased her around while she made cheesy puns and sat in suggestive poses that definitely defied the laws of human bone structure. She had no real plan, no interesting gadgets, and her only power seemed to be really fast and really underdressed. On top of that, her villain identity as a friend of Bruce Wayne was so obvious that it took all the tension out of the mystery. What's worse is that she was treated like a major threat when she was really just a distraction to pad out the length of the book. Writers during that era seemed to think that if they drew a character with enough exposed skin, nobody would notice she had zero personality. Honestly, she felt like a relic from a much older, dumber time in comics when female characters were just walking scenery. Even now, almost no one uses her in stories because there isn't anything to her besides a costume that would give her a very serious cold in a Gotham winter. Though on some nights, I probably would like to see her once in a while, if you know what I mean. Number 7, Sleez. There are some villains that are so gross, they make you want to wash your hands after reading the comic, and Sleez is the king of that pile. He's a short, ugly little creature from the planet Apocalypse who looks like a toad that's been living in a dumpster in the middle of Chernobyl. While most villains want to take over the world or rob a bank, Sleez just wants to be P-Hub's movie director. In a 1980s story that everyone wishes they could delete from their brains, he kidnapped Big Barda and Superman to force them into making an adult movie. It was truly bizarre and disgusting choice for a mainstream superhero comic, and honestly it felt like the writer was just trying to see how much they could get away with. Big Barda is a fierce legendary warrior, but this story reduced her to a mind-controlled victim for the sake of a really creepy plot. Here's the thing about Sleez, there is nothing cool or menacing about a villain whose entire gimmick is being a sexual predator. He doesn't have a tragic backstory or a clever motive, he's just a walking pile of slime that makes us feel like we want to puke. That's not enough, the story didn't add anything to the characters either, and instead just left a permanent stain on their history that modern writers try to ignore. And the worst of all is that this happened in a Superman book, which I would say is usually the most wholesome place in the DC universe. Like, maybe you would expect this in a Batman comic, but not Superman's. He isn't the kind of villain you want to see return for a big rematch. He's the kind of villain you hope fell into a black hole between panels. I think we can all agree that the best way to handle Sleez is to pretend he was a collective fever dream we all had at the same time. Number 6, Kanjar Ro. If you ever wanted to see a villain who is basically a giant space-faring annoyance, then Kanjar Ro's your guy. He's an alien dictator who looks like a pink bug in a bathrobe and is constantly the most pathetic person in the room. Most Justice League villains are world-ending threats, but I would say Kanjar Ro is more like a mosquito that won't stop buzzing in your ear. He relies on a gamma gong to paralyze people, which is the kind of weapon you'd expect to see on a cereal box prize from the 1950s. This guy's a total coward who spends most of his time shrieking orders at his slaves, which at one time even includes the Justice League, and then crying when one goes out of his way to punch him. He doesn't have the dignity of a real conqueror, he's just a middle manager with a bad spaceship and an even worse attitude. On top of that, he's frequently used as a filler villain when the writers can't think of anything better to do with the League. You see him on a cover and you immediately know the story's going to involve some convoluted, boring trap that gets resolved in 5 minutes. What makes it even worse is that he keeps coming back despite losing every single time in the most embarrassing ways possible. He has no intimidation factor, no cool powers, and a visual design that makes him look like a background character from a rejected sci-fi pilot. We hate him because he takes up space that could be used for literally anyone else, including, I don't know, a brick or a very angry cat. It's almost impressive how he managed to stay relevant for decades while possessing all the natural charisma of a wet paper bag and a vacuum. Number 5, Egg Foo. Let's be honest, there are some things from the 1960s that should have stayed buried, and Egg Foo is at the top of that list. He is exactly what he sounds like. A giant sentient egg with a face, and he is one of the most racist things ever printed by a major company. Originally a Wonder Woman villain, he was a massive caricature of Chinese people, complete with a mustache he used as a whip and a fake insulting accent. He was created during a time of heavy yellow peril propaganda, and looking at his old issues today is genuinely physically painful. DC eventually realized how terrible he was and tried to fix him by turning him into a giant robot or a weird biomechanical monster named Chang Zhu. The thing about this guy is that even if you remove the blatant racism, you're still left with a villain who is a giant egg, which I think is just fundamentally stupid. No matter how many spikes or laser beams you glue onto him, he still looks like breakfast gone wrong. On top of that, his existence is a constant reminder of a history of bigotry that most comic fans are trying to move past. If that's not already bad enough, DC keeps trying to bring him back every few years like they're convinced they can make an evil egg cool like No, you can't, buddy. Every time he pops up in a modern comic, we just roll our eyes because the concept is too broken to ever work. He ruins the tone of any story he's in because it's impossible to feel tension when the heroes are fighting an actual dairy product. He isn't scary, he isn't clever, and his history is so toxic that he basically functions as a giant keep out sign for new readers. That's why you have to admire the optimism of any editor who thinks a giant bigoted omelet is exactly what a modern superhero story is missing. Number 4, Perpetua. Now we're moving on to the big leagues of the most hated villains in all of DC, starting with Perpetua. She's the villainous personification of that one kid at the playground who keeps making up rules so they would never lose. She was introduced as the mother of the multiverse, a cosmic being who is supposedly more powerful than every other god we've ever seen. This is a classic case of power creep, where a writer thinks that adding more zeros to a power level makes a character more interesting. Instead of feeling like a massive threat, she just felt like a giant boring plot device that made everyone else look weak. First off, her existence basically ruined the stakes of every previous DC story by revealing that the ultimate villains were actually just her kids. On top of that, she spent most of her time just floating in space and looking menacing, while her henchmen did all the actual work. What makes it even worse to me is that for a being who created all of reality, her personality was basically just, I am evil and I want to destroy things because I said so. There was no complexity or interesting philosophy. She was just a giant lady in a weird hat that was too strong for the heroes to fight. The storyline involved her dragged on for years across multiple books, making fans feel like they were stuck in a cosmic waiting room. By the time the final battle happened, most people were just happy she was gone so they could get back to stories about characters they actually liked. Basically, she turned the DC universe into a giant math equation where the only answer was buy more crossover issues. Number 3, Superboy Prime. Superboy Prime is the villainous version of a fanboy who spends 18 hours a day complaining about movies on the internet. He comes from a world like ours where superheroes only exist in comics, but he eventually got powers and went absolutely insane, and I mean that literally. He is famous for being incredibly whiny, consistently screaming about how the real DC heroes are too dark and how everything was better in the old days. Irony is, of course, that he expresses this by being the darkest, most violent character in the room. One thing that he is most hated for is his retcon punch, where he literally punched the walls of reality so hard it changed people's backstories, which honestly might be one of the dumbest plot devices in history. On top of that, he's responsible for some of the most brutal, unnecessary deaths in comics, like when he casually ripped off the arm of Risk, a hero people actually liked. He isn't a villain you love to hate. He's a villain who's just plain annoying because his dialogue sounds like an angry forum post. What makes it even worse is that he is so overpowered that it often feels like he only wins because the plot demands it. He would fly through suns and ignore magic just because he was throwing a temper tantrum. He was a meta commentary on toxic fans, but the writers made him so insufferable that reading his scenes felt like a chore. He would spend pages crying about how Earth Prime was better while murdering teenagers, making him the ultimate hypocrite. Even though he eventually got a redemption arc, most fans still remember him as the petulant brat who ruined perfectly good storylines with his reality warping fists. But again, none of these even compare to the top 2, whom I would call the absolute worst villains in DC history. Number 2, Robin King. The Robin King is what happens when someone decides that the evil Batman trope hasn't been taken nearly far enough into edgelord territory. He is the young Bruce Wayne from a dark universe who didn't lose his parents to a mugger, he killed them himself because he's a psychopath. The character feels like he was designed by a teenager who just discovered gore movies and thinks that disturbing is the same thing as well written. He's a pint-sized murder machine who wears a crown and spends his time coming up with the most gross ways possible to kill heroes. Here's what's annoying about him. His main power is basically infinite prep time, which is the most boring ability a character can have. He magically has a special gadget to kill every hero he meets, like when he somehow defeated Red Tornado by spraying him with chemicals that rips apart while spinning, and on top of that, he kills beloved characters like Jonah Hex in ways that feel mean-spirited and designed specifically to shock the reader rather than tell a good story. What annoys me the most is that he's just a child. yet he outsmarts the smartest people in the world because the plot says so. He represents the point where the dark multiverse concept completely ran out of gas and started running on pure cynicism. We fans found him exhausting because there was no way to beat him until the writer decided he was done playing with his toys. He isn't scary. He's just that annoying kid who says he has an everything-proof shield when you're playing pretend. He took the legacy of Batman and turned it into a cheap, bloody slasher movie that nobody asked for. He's the perfect villain for anyone who thinks the most interesting part of a superhero story is watching a 10-year-old commit various high-level war crimes. Comment down below if you think he's the most annoying kid you've ever seen. Number 1, Batman Who Laughs. Topping the list is the character who holds the world's record for being the most overused villain in the history of the medium. The Batman Who Laughs started as a cool idea, a version of Bruce Wayne who was infected by Joker gas, but DC decided to put him in every single book they published for 3 years. He was the secret mastermind behind everything, the guy who could never lose, and the character who always had a hidden plan that allowed him to win every fight. First off, he had the most blatant plot armor ever seen, constantly outsmarting literal gods and cosmic beings with nothing but a spiked visor and a creepy laugh. If that's not terrible enough, his dialogue became incredibly repetitive, always talking about how a Batman who laughs is a Batman who wins, which stopped being cool after like the 10th time. It gets all worse when he completely overshadows every other villain in the DC roster, making legendary guys like Lex Luthor look like complete idiots. He eventually became a literal god called the Darkest Knight, because apparently being a super genius ninja wasn't enough. We grew to despise him not because he was evil, but because we were just so tired of seeing his face on every single cover. He became a symbol of creator's pet syndrome, where a character is pushed way past their expiration date because the editors think he's still trendy. By the time he was finally defeated, the entire fan base let out a sigh of relief that was loud enough to be heard from space. He's the ultimate example of how to take a great concept and turn it into a source of pure frustration through sheer relentless overexposure. Honestly, at this point, I find it a miracle that he didn't find a way to outsmart the writers and prevent himself from being written out of the story entirely. That's it for this one. If you liked the video, hit that like button, subscribe for more, and ring the bell so you never miss a drop. Craving more stories from comics, movies, and beyond? Check out this video right here. Cheers, and see you in the next one.